Hello, everybody. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show where even Charles Bukowski would say, you might want to slow down. I'm your host, William R. Hincy, and joining me today, I'm really delighted and honored to have John Engell on with me. John, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Thank you.
So really delighted to have you here. So maybe for the audience, you could give them a little background on you and your writing and to get us started.
Okay. I'm 75 years old, and I'm about to have my first book of fiction published, a book of short stories. And the title of this book will be Piedmont People, a collection of North Carolina stories. So all these stories, almost all of them take place in Carolina. A few of them don't take place there, but involve people who have come from there. I didn't grow up there, but I lived there for many years. I went to graduate school there. My wife is from North Carolina. My older son was born in North Carolina. And when I was working on my doctorate at Chapel Hill in American literature, I fell in love with Southern literature. It was the great place to study it at the time. So I think that's probably all I need to say about it at the moment. I've also been writing since I retired about almost 10 years ago now. I've finished this volume of short stories. I have another volume's worth of short stories, and I've written 3 novels.
Oh, so very good.
I have written more in the last 10 years than I wrote in all the rest of my life combined. And I feel very lucky to have been able to do that.
Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned you got your doctorate. What did you do after? What did you get your doctorate in, and what did you do after?
I got my doctorate in 19th century American literature. And I taught for a while at a liberal arts college in North Carolina called Davidson. Then once my wife finished her doctorate, or was finishing her doctorate at Chapel Hill, also in American literature, we got jobs here in California, moved to San Jose, California. My wife had never been west of the Mississippi River, and I had only been out here for job interview. And we moved here, and we've lived in the Bay Area ever since.
Oh, very good.
Our sons are both West Coast boys. One of them lives in Los Angeles. He's a prosecutor, so you have to be careful of him. And my younger son lives in Seattle.
Oh, so, that's good to know. If I ever get in trouble, I'll be giving you a call.
Yeah, you should definitely do that. He'll be glad to give you advice, good or bad. I don't know, but he'd be glad to do it. So
right. Right, very good. And then, so you mentioned you're in the Bay Area now. So you're like San Francisco, or where?
At the moment, I was living in San Francisco, and in March I had a heart attack. I was with friends. I was on Van Ness Avenue, right in the heart of the city. My heart stopped, and fortunately, I was 2 blocks from a brand new hospital that specializes in heart care. And apparently the ambulance was there in about 5 minutes. They started my heart again. I went in the hospital. It stopped again a couple of days later. They started it again. They put 2 stents in. And now I'm walking 50 miles a week.
Very good.
Swimming every other day. So awesome. It's kind of a miracle.
Yeah, you know. Hearing heart stopped is usually not a good thing.
Just
so especially twice.
Twice, that's right. But now it seems to be going all right.
Oh, very good. Very good. I'm happy. I'm happpi to hear that. I'm happy to see you here. Yeah.
Keep your fingers crossed. No.
Right. And if we're to head out to the Bay Area, what's the best place for a drink, and what's the one thing you have to do?
Oh my God. Well, I lived when I was in San Francisco. Right now I'm in San Jose. But in the years I was in San Francisco, I lived at Opera Plaza, right near the opera and the symphony buildings, 2 blocks from the city hall. And Max's restaurant, which was founded by a New York Jewish family and specialized in New York Jewish food, but is now owned by Iranians, interestingly. They've kept a lot of the liverwurst on the menu and that sort of thing. That's a great place to have supper and a drink right there, right near the heart of what's referred to as the entertainment district in the city.
Right. Okay.
So I would recommend it.
Max's, okay. I'll have to remember that next time we're up your way.
It's called Max's Opera Plaza or Opera Cafe, I think. Max's Opera Cafe.
Okay, maybe we'll see the opera while we're there. It'll be
it's one of the great operas of the world. So
yeah.
Costs a small fortune, but that's okay.
Does it? Yeah, well, everything. It's California. Everything costs a small fortune. I bought coffee earlier, right, and it was $10. So,
okay.
So you mentioned you're a short story writer. We got one volume that's coming out here fairly soon, maybe out by the time the show's hitting, and then another one you're working on. Maybe you can get us started and set the mood here and read us something.
I'd love to. I'm going to read the opening several pages from one of the stories. There are 12 stories in the volume, plus the first chapter of my first novel that I completed, which can be read as a short story. And 11 of the stories have already been published in literary magazines. One of them has not. And I'm going to read a little bit of the opening of this one, which has been published, but will be obviously in the volume as well. The name of the story is Bridal, Bouquet. Most of my stories are written in the first person, and a number of them are written from the point of view of a woman, as is this one. So I'll start. If I'm going on too long, just tell me to stop, okay?
Okay, will do.
All right. Bridal, Bouquet. Somewhere along Highway 15501, near Sanford, North Carolina, there's a brick Baptist church, a sturdy, unadorned, oblong box topped by a squat white steeple. The sort of church that doesn't appear to celebrate God or to proclaim human vanity. The sort of church no one notices, especially late afternoon travelers returning to Chapel Hill from the beach, educated travelers who've trained their eyes to pick out the few buildings, the few remaining old farmhouses and barns that momentarily transform the Piedmont heat and haze and monotony and plainness into beauty. At least I'd never noticed, not until our last trip down that way. My husband was driving, as always. As always, our boys were sitting in the back seat. As always, I was sitting in the front passenger seat. I was reading North of Boston, half New England, half afternoon nap, 0 North Carolina, or so it seemed. Home burial woke me up. I'd read it years before in college, with faint annoyance shading to fear. Now the talk brought me to the edge of tears. The failure of actions and of words seemed complete and cruel, as if Robert Frost, for all his sympathy, were taking cool pride in dissecting the misery of a wife and a husband. Misery matters, Frost seemed to be saying, but it changes nothing. It lends no dignity to sufferers, only unending loneliness and pain. Catharsis is impossible in such a world. My stillborn tears were worthless. I looked up in a watery daze and saw the church. I saw everything at once and quite clearly, as if a sea had parted to reveal a temple on the shore. Around the entrance beneath the squat white steeple stood a knot of 100 people. I knew at once I was watching the end of a Southern Saturday June wedding. As we drove past, the bride threw her bouquet into the air, a beautiful arching toss. She probably pitches for the local girls' softball team. The bouquet rose 10 or 12 feet from her hand, a perfect rainbow of color. It sailed above the people assembled below her at the foot of the concrete stoop and fell into the hands of a bridesmaid. I guess she was a bridesmaid, though I never saw her buried in the crowd. I only saw her hands, broad and maternal and strong, reach up toward the bride, the steeple, and the cloudless sky, and make the catch, an assertive, fluid grab, the motion of a sturdy left fielder. Blonde or brunette, tall or short, lovely or plain, she caught the bouquet and pulled it down through the sea of heads to her bosom. We sped on, leaving the church and the wedding party behind. Did you see that? I asked my husband. What? His eyes were on the road. That wedding, the bride threw the bouquet. One of the bridesmaids caught it. My husband's head turned toward me for an instant. He stared, his flat, quizzical brown eyes focused just above my head. Of course, he hadn't seen the church or the wedding party or the bouquet. What man would, especially when he was driving? I'll read one more little section here.
Okay.
I've decided her name is Amy. I know she's the bridesmaid who caught the bouquet. Amy lives on a farm a few miles outside of town with her father, mother, 2 younger brothers, and 2 younger sisters. After the reception in the church hall, after the ritual tossing of bouquet and rice, after the departure of the bride and groom, Amy and her family drive home. Amy sits in the middle bench of their van with her sisters, one on either side. The bouquet is tucked in the crook of Amy's round arm. It perfumes the van. At home, in the kitchen, Amy runs 6 inches of water into a tall green glass vase, slides the stems into the vase, rearranges the flowers, then walks to her room and sets the bouquet on the vanity near her bed and in front of the mirror so she can see 2 bouquets. Amy has a streak of sensuality in her blood, a gift from some unknown relative. But later, she says her prayers, kneeling, her elbows propped on the mattress, her hands folded below her chin. She's dressed in a white nightgown with lace at the throat and wrists. Lord, Amy prays, protect me and my family and make us happy. The images of her mind are firm and linear. Bless all my relatives and friends, especially Julie now she's married, and bless this world you've given us that it may blossom and grow. Amy looks at the 2 bouquets, the one on the vanity, the one in the mirror. Amen, she says. She turns off the lights and slips between the warm sheets. She stares at the dark outline of the bouquet, trying to see its reflection, but she cannot sleep. It's unusual for Amy not being able to sleep, but she knows what to do. She rises, jerks the nightgown over her head, pulls on a green t-shirt and jeans, and hurries on silent, bare feet from the house. Her thoughts become more colorful and chaotic. She walks past the family burial plot through the knee-high corn down to the willow trees, whispering by the creek. The new moon is rising. She stands beside the creek, its banks covered with vines, saplings, brambles. Beyond the willows, a sycamore waves its leaves, crackling softly in the faint breeze. Lying by the creek, Amy sees the bouquet arch through the air. Her hands reach up. It falls softly. She pulls the sweet smell to her breast. Her mind enters the bouquet. She nestles among the stems, the blooms. Their softness brushes her cheeks, her breasts, her thighs. Great bursts of green, yellow, orange, red, and purple fill her eyes. She breathes the fragrance. It puffs her lungs. She hears the petals rustle her ears. Fingers of night breeze move among the flowers. Dew falls. I'll stop there.
It's really lovely. It's really was a really poignant image there too, because it starts with that she's recounting frost and how there's like no misery, there's no catharsis, and then you get that wedding scene juxtapositioned right next to it, and wedding kind of is its type of catharsis, right? And so that's it's a lovely journey and a really powerful reading. I always love listening to you read in general, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Of course, lots of wonderful, exciting things happen in this story, but you'll have to get the volume in order to know what.
Very good. Sure. And that's actually was my next question here. I'm very delayed on it, but what are we drinking?
I don't normally drink this early in the day, but this is a local California Sauvignon Blanc from Sonoma. And I love light white wine. It's still warm enough here to make it appropriate. But I also have my water. I don't drink too much wine this time of day. This will be it. So if my whistle needs wetting later, it may well be water.
Very good. And just so everyone knows, we're both West Coast, so it's not even 2:00 yet here. So, but that it is 5:00 somewhere. I mean, it's almost 5:00 on the East Coast. So I think
that's what it is. Yep.
Very good. So, and I'm drinking. I wanted to share this because I was excited about it. We found this with my wife on our. We went on our anniversary. If you could see that, okay. Yeah. I should actually hold it to the camera. We went up. My wife proposed to me because she wasn't certain that like my proposal was going to be suitable, so she did it herself. So she's very empowered, and she was probably right. And so we used to go up to Cambria, so Central Coast, California, up, towards your way. We used to go up there pretty frequently, just to get away, right? I mean, it's for anyone that doesn't know, like the center of California is like next to empty. So you get the Center Coast, there's little cities.
Compared to where I am and where you are, it's next to empty. Yeah, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's really beautiful, the beautiful coastline, but then also just, this lovely weather as you get all the mist and everything in. So we've always loved going up, but we hadn't gone for a few years. And so we went up this past weekend. It was last weekend we went up. And I didn't think, because it's not real, populated, we went into a liquor store and I didn't think they were going to have any local whiskeys, but I always like to ask. And I was like, so I'm like, it might be a long shot. Is there any local distilleries? He goes, yes, there's this one. It's Rod and Hammers is the name. And they call it the SLO Stills, SLO for San Luis Obispo.
Right.
And so so I got these. So it's my first time trying them. I started before the show because I'm a method actor and I like to 12 o'clock. I need to make sure I'm in the right space. So
Uh-huh.
this will be my first sip of it, but I'm so cheers.
And do they cheers? Cheers. Do they sell it? Do they call it bourbon? What do they call
Yes,
it?
this one is they had a number, so that I get the cask strength bourbon.
Yeah, it's bourbon. Yeah.
So this one's 112 proof, so it's a little on the strong side. They had one they called an old fashioned bourbon, and anyone who watches the show knows I almost always have like a side old fashioned with me, like doing this show. I love old fashioned, but the guy had told me it's just a little less, strength, and I'm like, well, why do I need less strength? I'm still gonna do the cask. But then they also had a rye. Bottle's gonna look about exactly the same, but they had a rye here too. And that one's a 90 proof rye. So I got those two bottles. So, and it is really it's really a tasty bourbon. Doesn't feel too strong at all. I wanted to get, so I know you're a professor for a while. Interesting. I've had a number of different people that had done time in academia, and you see a very consistent career path with most writers these days. And that's, you go in and you become a professor, and then as part of your professorial duties, you also write things on the side. So it's writing's kind of been professionalized, that way, at least fiction and books to a degree. Before I ask any questions, do you agree with kind of that assessment, or am I way off the boat?
For the most part. But every situation is a little bit different from every other situation. And I mean, mine, for example, most of the fiction I've written since I retired.
Sure.
And I was involved. I was involved in a group called the Writers' Grotto of San Francisco. There were about 100 of us. The grotto's opened back up. It closed during the pandemic. And we had offices. We had a whole floor of an office building. And we had writers groups. A majority of the writers in the Writers' Grotto were actually journalists, but independent journalists. But there were a number of us who were fiction writers. There were some poets, a few screenwriters and playwrights. And so in many ways, I think the Writers' Grotto was the most valuable thing for me, more valuable in terms of my quote so-called creative writing than the academic world had been. Not there were things I loved about the academic world. I loved to teach.
Sure.
But I mean, my case is unusual. I know people who are writers who are not in the academic world, who do other things instead, have other careers.
Sure.
And there are some people in the academic world who, once they get tenure, never seem to write another word. So, there's every possible variety.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely nuance in all of it. I wonder why you think the grotto, why did you learn more with the Writers' Grotto versus?
Well, we just, I mean, people were, some of the people in the Writers' Grotto were also teaching. Not many of them, very few of them were teaching full time. They were teaching part-time and writing. Some of them weren't teaching at all. They were doing only writing and trying to make a living off of it, which is possible as an independent journalist or a novelist, but it's not very common.
Right, sure.
It's unusual, in fact. And well, I just think that the focus, everybody's focus was on their writing. That's why they were there. And so there were a couple of groups of fiction writers who met. There was a poetry group that met occasionally that I went to because I do write some poetry. And sometimes I go to the journalism get-togethers because I wanted to hear people talk about what they were doing and what they were reading. And I found it was a very, the community experience there was focused on the act of writing. And I got a lot of help with my writing from some people there as well. They would read things I had written, or I would read them out loud to the group. We did a lot of out loud reading. I got lots of good suggestions. I've stayed in touch with a number of those people.
Sure.
I hope at some point I can get back to a situation like that.
Right. Yeah. No, that sounds lovely. Is it like that communal cross-pollination of things too, where it's, you're not just the short story guys all together, but going and hearing about the journalist and
that's right.
Playwrights.
Oftentimes there would be short story writers and novelists all together in the same fiction group, which helped me a great deal since I was trying to do both.
Sure.
And there are, there's a group in Los Angeles. There's a smaller group in Seattle. There are some other cities. I know there's one of these writers co-ops in Chicago, and of course New York. And I don't know where else. There are probably others that I don't know about.
Right.
They do exist in relatively small numbers all over the country.
How would you describe your kind of present stage of life and how that's affected your writing, if at all?
Well, that's very complicated. For 6 or 7 years after I retired, writing was my job, and the Writer's Grotto was my primary place of work. Though I also worked in the Mechanics Institute Library in San Francisco, which I love. One of the oldest libraries in the West. And also, they have the longest running, continually operating chess club in America.
Really? That's cool.
Several grandmasters.
Right.
And they've had the greatest chess players in the world come to give lectures. And it's a fascinating,
that's really neat.
The Mechanics Institute. It's wonderful.
Sure.
But
did they have screening parties for the Queen's Gambit?
Not that I'm aware of. I wasn't invited. So, in any case, so I just feel very lucky that, when I retired, I didn't really retire at all.
Sure. Yeah, I always think that too. It's like, retirement's good, but I don't know that I'd want to retire in that concept of doing nothing and only traveling. It's I think I'd still just want to do things you're passionate about.
No, that's inconceivable to me. But you asked, so I did that. I worked at the Writer's Grotto and the Mechanics Institute, and I wrote almost every day. And then the pandemic happened. And that changed everything. The Writer's Grotto closed. The Mechanics Institute was closed for quite a long time. I stopped using public transportation.
Sure.
I hadn't had a car in San Francisco for 7 years. I got a used Prius. I started driving in many ways, life changed. And my writing, I stopped writing those places. I started writing just where I lived, which I didn't like nearly as much, frankly. And I didn't write as much. But now, since I recovered from those heart attacks that occurred in March, I'm focused much more on writing again. So it's been actually a kind of complicated history the last 10 years.
Uh-huh.
I just feel incredibly thankful that I'm where I'm at about all of this.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, and you look great too. So all that 50 miles walking and every other day swimming has done well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'm probably in better shape now than I was for the last 10 years.
Sure. Right. Right. Yeah. Never too late. Did the health scare with your heart stopping twice in a matter of a couple of days there, has that changed the tone or complexity of your writing at all, or is that?
Not that I can tell. Not that I can tell. I don't know the answer to that, though, really. I remember nothing about the heart attacks. I have no memory of it.
Sure.
I was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks, and I have no memory of being there.
Wow. That's strange. I mean, I guess you have no memory, so it's just like
bizarre.
I just didn't
I remember right up until
right.
I remember once I got out.
Uh-huh.
It's like there's this chunk of 2 weeks.
Sure.
Completely gone. I have to rely on what my wife and my sons and my friends who came to visit me tell me, because I have no memory of any of it.
Well,
so I guess maybe that, I don't know. I feel the same, though, as far as writing goes. I don't feel differently at all, except I'm eager to do it even more than ever.
Sure. Sure. Well, I don't know if this plays at all, but I know, and I don't necessarily completely ascribe to this, but there's a theory out that like writing is essentially a immortality quest. That like we're trying to leave something behind. It's kind of the stone tablets, it's your pyramid, it's whatever you're building.
Well, but you can say that for practically any human endeavor, any of the arts, certainly. Sure. But having kids, I guess.
Yeah.
Having a successful medical career and saving lives, yeah. Sending the really bad guys to jail like my prosecutor's son does. Saving lives indirectly that way. Yeah, I think, there are all kinds of things we do that in a sense we think of as possibly living after us.
Sure.
And that's not a bad thing, actually. I think it's admirable to think about that.
Sure. I think it's a lovely thing to think of. It's a more selfish thing to not want to leave anything behind.
It would not upset me if people were reading anything I wrote 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's an interesting question, though. So what do you hope to leave behind as a writer?
I mean, I'll give a ridiculously simple answer. Things that people actually like to read.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It's not, I mean, I have certain agendas that I hope are not too evident in my writing.
Sure.
It's hard right now, given the political situation in this country, not to think about the relationship of that to any endeavor that we might pursue. Writing, anything in the arts, certainly, but in most careers, I think. On the other hand, I love to write, even when I'm struggling, and I love it when people like reading what I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
That's good enough. That's
Very
good.
good. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, doing this show and like asking these questions and getting to spend time with all these, amazing writers and amazing people. I've had a lot of introspection on those things. And I think over time, what I've come to realize, very specifically from this show, is that to me, it's not about the words or the story or the character. It's about the expression. It's that connection I'm hoping to make. And I think at the end of the day, I just want to like reach out and just hug my reader and laugh until we cry or cry until we laugh. Because I think that's how you change the world. I think you change it through human connection. And I'm hoping if there's some legacy I leave behind, I hope at the end of the day, it's just an open embrace. And I hope that embrace goes for 100 years or 10 years or however long it can last.
Well, and in that sense, I mean, in a way, I've had two careers. I was a teacher and I'm a writer. But I think I feel the same way about both of them. That, and sitting here reading out loud from one of my stories, I didn't read out loud from my stories in my classes, but I read out loud a lot.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I think reading out loud is a great art form.
Absolutely.
And it can make a huge difference for a class if it's done right. And whether, whatever writer I might be reading at any given time, I'd like to think that on occasion there would be a few students out there for whom that would make a difference in their lives.
Sure.
And just as I hope that's true for readers of whatever I write or whatever lots of other writers write. Right. So in some respects, it's exactly the same. In others, it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's I'm sure that's true. I think that I like that point though, because one of the things I loved about the show, and that when I first conceived of it, I was like, authors will be reading their work. That's my one thing. Like, if you don't want to read your work, like, you're not coming on like this. Job one. Because I think for two things. I think it is a great art form, and having someone read you a story, and when it's read well, it's so powerful listening to it, and it's a different experience than when you read it yourself. And it's lovely, especially getting to hear it from the author themselves. So you get to hear that voice. And then as a writer, I literally, nothing I write ever goes to any publication, anything, unless I read it out loud. Now I've probably read it out loud 1,000 times before.
Well, me too. I read
anyway.
And with the novels, I read not every day, but every week, certainly, I read out loud everything I've written.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even before the first significant revision.
Sure.
That begins to tell me a lot about
what
I want to do differently and what's right.
Yeah, I believe it, because I and I'll ask you the same thing here in a second, but I like to ask people, like, what's your one advice to aspiring writers out there, and you get a lot of like read and write, which is very true and solid advice, but the one I always think of is just read your work out loud, because for one, just little things like when you have to read it and you're reading off that page, like, you tend to spot your typos and things because you have to say it out loud, so it corrects it. But then you start hearing those character voices. You start realizing, would this person talk that way? Would they express this that way? How does all of this sound? And so, even my novel, it's at I think I'm 260,000 words into this thing now. Every one's been read out loud. Every chapter before I ever kind of say it's done. I sit down and just read it front to back out loud. And it drives my family crazy because, of course, I have to act it out and everything, but it's worthwhile. What would your advice be to any writers out there?
Well, my main advice would be set aside a time every day to write. And if nothing comes, just sit there and think about what needs to be done. And some of my friends insist that they get at least a certain number of words a day or a certain number of pages a day. I've never done that, but I try to write almost every day now and again. And it doesn't hurt to give yourself a day off once in a while, but
sure.
And that's the bottom line for me.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the pandemic, a vast majority of the writing I did was in the mornings. That's changed a little bit. Partly now for me, since I began my recovery, I do most of my walking in the morning. I try to walk between 4 and 5 miles before lunch. And that means that I have to shift my writing some to the afternoon. But I'm okay with that now. But that's it. Just write every day. And 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever works for you. For me, before the pandemic, I was, I'd say, about a 5-hour guy a day. Now it's a little less.
Mm-hmm.
But
sure. But I think your point about kind of progress versus milestones, right? There's that milestone of 1,500 words. It's like, I have to hit that. And that works for some people. I tend to think of it a little bit more like I just want to make sure I make progress every day, because sometimes you need a day to really think everything through, and it's more of ideation day.
Some days, for whatever reason, bingo, you stop and you think, my God, there's 10 pages here.
Sure.
And then other days there's 1 page, but okay. Oh, and one other thing. This probably won't go over with most listeners, but initial draft, I write everything in longhand.
Okay.
Not on the computer.
Sure. And
so I've got all these longhand versions of I've written. And I skip lines. And then the first quick edit, I just go back and read it out loud. And I find it easier to start the editing process when I've written in longhand.
Sure.
And then I stick it on the computer, and then God knows how many edits it goes through. Many.
Mm-hmm.
Many.
Sure. Yeah. I used to do that myself. Actually, I had my first novel I ever wrote is sitting in our closet on one of the paper holsters, because it's all written, right? It's all longhand. It's sitting there, and I never actually typed it all in. I at one point, this will probably be more like a I have no idea, when I have free time thing. Is I would love to go back and kind of edit it down. I think it's more of a novella than a novel and things, just that having grown 20 years since I've written this thing. So I would like to go back to it at one point, but after that one, I do write everything straight on the computer now. But I know what you mean about taking it longhand, and then that edit when it goes in is a very natural transition.
That's right.
Like, okay, I have to put it in. So it does make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So, but I've gotten to the age where I can't even read my writing. It's actually, when I used to write then, people used to go, "Oh, your writing is kind of nice," because I wrote a lot. And now I'm like, I don't even know how to form these letters.
That can happen. There's no doubt about it. I sometimes find myself printing rather than writing, because I know I can read it if I print it.
Well, in California now too, I think they just signed a law to actually start teaching cursive again.
Yeah, I was very pleased with that, actually. When they first stopped teaching cursive in some schools, I was shocked. I thought, wait a minute, this is not right. This is a mistake. Fortunately, my sons are old enough, so they missed that.
Sure. I did too. Yeah, I learned cursive, but my kids, no, none of them. We have let's see, Rhiannon is going to be 24 coming up. So my oldest daughter didn't learn, and then our youngest son's 12, and he just missed it. They're going to start teaching it. I think they said next year. All of this talk about like death and like pandemics and cursive writing. I think it's time for a shot. So I'd like to call this section of the show shots. You can continue to drink your white wine here, but we'll have some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Just initial thoughts for these. They're going to be, this is hard hitting journalism here. So just be prepared.
Okay. All right.
Are you a Swiftie? And how many times did you attend the Eras concert?
Don't total ignorance. How about that?
Have you heard of Taylor Swift?
Oh yeah, I have heard of her, but I've never heard. Sorry.
No, it's zero.
I'm kind of out of it. How about that? I've seen pictures of her. Does that count?
I mean, I guess, they call her fans Swifties, which my Michaela would be one of them.
I didn't know that. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So, but I like to go like, oh, you're a Swifter. And like, no, that's the thing. You clean the floor. They're Swifties. And I'm like, oh, you're a Swifter. You're a Swifter.
Okay.
I think they mixed it. That could have been a nice cross promo between the two.
All right.
Have you ever witnessed anything inexplicable?
Yes.
Yeah? What was it?
Flying saucer.
Okay. No more details? I mean, I'm very intrigued by this flying saucer.
I wrote a story about it. You have to get the volume. It's the story is called Our UFO.
Oh, okay. Very good.
My uncle, who was someone who distrusted the imagination and loved working with his hands. He was a superb carpenter, made beautiful furniture. He and I were fishing one night at the lake I spent every summer at when I was growing up and after parts of summers, and we saw a flying saucer.
Wow.
And to my astonishment, my uncle insisted it was a flying saucer.
Really? Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
That's a nice memory there.
And
it's funny when I asked that question too, that is the most common answer. I remember growing up, it used to be like it was kooky if you saw like a UFO. And then now every time like I ask someone, there's been a few others, but yeah, I mean, it has to be like 80%.
That story is the first story in my volume.
Oh, I look forward to reading that one. I will read that one first.
That's the idea.
All right. Sweet potatoes, abomination or suitable dog food?
Sweet potatoes? I love sweet potatoes. What is this? That's an unacceptable pair of choices. Put a little unsalted butter on those sweet potatoes.
No, I can't. My kids know there's sweet potatoes and flavored whiskey. I don't believe they should
flavored
exist.
Whiskey, I veto, but sweet potatoes I love.
All right. We'll just have to agree to disagree.
All those years in North Carolina.
That's true. Piece of advice that changed your life.
My dad had a heart attack when he was 56, and he died when he was 57. The last time I saw him, he told me, take care of yourself. And I, given what was happening to him, I knew what he meant. And that advice is something I think about often. Because nobody else is going to take care of me if I don't take care of myself.
Right.
And in the real old-fashioned sense of those words.
Mm-hmm.
Don't overdo anything, but enjoy what you do.
Sure. That's lovely. That's it always reminds me of when you're on a plane and they go, the airbags will drop, and always put your airbag on first,
right,
before you try to help. And it's like, well, because you need to take care of yourself. You need to do those things or else you can't. That's just a very right. It's an immediate sense of it happening. And we forget about that and the hustle and bustle and what we do in life, but it's still important on the everyday level.
Well, and of course, that little command in the airplanes takes on much greater significance the first time you fly with your kids when they're little.
Sure.
Then you take it in there in a way you never have bothered to take it in.
Very true. I remember, because you kind of ignore them, right? And then you've flown a bunch and you start to ignore it again because you've heard it all 100 times. But and we were at that stage to where it's like, okay, I've heard all this a million times, and we're flying with my son. And I think it was his first time flying where he was very conscious of everything, right? I think he'd been on planes before, but had been young to where he didn't. And so he got that safety car. He's reading that safety and not nervous. He's just very interested. So he's watching very intently. And he's like, okay, Dad, they drop. You have to put yours on first.
Okay. All right, there you go.
Thanks for reminding me. We're lovely here. Awesome. And so very last question for our shots portion here. Do you have a bucket list? And if so, was being on this show on it?
No. And therefore, no. Sorry.
All right. So you're supposed to just go, yes, of course, the show. I'm going to make one to put you on here.
Well, no, I'm delighted, but since I don't have a bucket list, it couldn't possibly be on it, could it? Nothing's on it.
Yeah, very good. Awesome. So then, thank you for that. Having some fun there. Maybe then we could get to the second reading to kind of close off the show here.
All right. The name of this story is Party on the Point, and it's another first-person story, but this one is from the point of view of a man. Like the woman in Bridal Bouquet, the speaker, he has a family. In this case, 2 daughters. They don't really play a role in this opening section, but and he lives in a small town in North Carolina. And he has an unexpected visitor. When I open the door, Bobby Joe Mills is standing under the bug light, a yellow ghost. He pulls off a black driving glove and sticks out his hand. Hi, he says, I'm back. We shake and he follows me into the family room. It's late. Ruth is upstairs asleep. I'm shocked, but somehow I'm not surprised. You didn't expect me, he says. He pulls off his other glove and sits in my rocking chair. You've been gone 30 years, I say. 28, he says. You never wrote. Wrote? To say hello. Let me know where you were. A postcard, an email, Bobby Joe. Shit, I knew I'd be back. You want a drink? Bourbon. Don't have bourbon. He gives me a strange look. I have wine, Bobby Joe, red or white or rosé. Red, he says. In the kitchen, I open a bottle and pour 2 glasses, both very full. I hear my rocking chair click, click, click. Thanks, says Bobby Joe. Where you been? I sit on the sofa. New York, Chicago, Seattle, Silicon Valley, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, Bangalore, Sumatra. Sumatra? I assisted tsunami victims. You work for the Red Cross, Bobby Joe? Yeah, he says, the Red Cross. He may be 10 pounds heavier, or he may not. And he has a splotch, like a birthmark, on the left side of his nose. Otherwise, he's amazingly the same. Broad shoulders, trim waist, coal black hair. We're both over 50, but he looks 10 years younger than me, maybe 20 in the dim light. What's been happening, he says. Not much. I hear you and Ruth have kids, too. Girls? Yeah, girls, Bobby Joe. They must be big. Rachel's a sophomore at Chapel Hill. Rebecca's a lawyer. A lawyer? Works for the DA in Durham. Girls take after you, says Bobby Joe. More like Ruth, I say. I bet they're gorgeous. I sip my wine. Insurance business flourishing, Bobby Joe smiles. His smile is still halfway to a sneer, or maybe it's the other way round. But now one of his lower front teeth is chipped, and along with the splotch, it makes his angular features look slightly lopsided and slightly sinister. Business is fine, I say. You haven't moved, he says. We like it here. It's a damn small house. He stares around the family room, which is a mess, as usual. Big enough for us, Bobby Joe. Old, too. Ruth likes old houses. Remember the day we trashed old man McAlpin's place? Bobby Joe leans forward. He and his blonde bimbo wife had gone on a fucking cruise or something. You and me and Elmer jimmied the back door and we trashed the place. Big fucking place. Regular mansion. Living room the size of this house. We did the bedrooms first. Sawed one leg off each bed. Broke all the cups in the kitchen cabinets, just the cups. I carved the dining room table, dug a couple of skulls into the maple, while you threw a gallon of red paint all over the living room walls, and Elmer brushed it on with a broom. Then we closed the drains in the bathroom sinks and tubs and turned on the hot water and left it running. Wanted his house to float down Main Street. Kept wishing we could see the bastard's face when he got home. But we didn't, I say. How old were we? 14, 15, 17, I say. Shit, that old. He finishes his wine. Anyone rich was a shit to us. We were the one and only original hard-ass radical gang of 3. Dad, Elmer, and Bobby Joe. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. We were small-town punks. McAlpin hadn't done a thing to me. He fired my daddy's ass, said Bobby Joe. I'd forgot. Fucking right he did. For the first time, Bobby Joe laughs, and in spite of the chipped tooth, It makes him look even younger. After a minute, he says, now you sell insurance. I work for the Red Cross. That's what happens. I wonder what else will happen, says Bobby Joe. He puts his wine glass down and stands up to leave. Sometimes we feel nothing we've ever done matters. One summer day when I was about 10, my mama came in the front door, wiping sweat out of her eyes with a Kleenex, a gust of hot wind chasing her heels. She rocked right on by me, chucked a bag of groceries onto the kitchen table, turned her right eyelid twitching, her face puffed with heat, and said, "That is the last bag of groceries I ever buy." Then she walked out the front door. It wasn't. She bought 1,000 more bags of groceries before she died, some in the summer heat, some on cool autumn days, the leaves red and gold, the sky brittle blue. Years later, when I was home from Chapel Hill for Christmas break, my daddy had the last of his fits. You could never forecast them, but the cause was always trivial. He couldn't get a screw to screw, or he couldn't fold the first section of the paper without tearing it, or he forgot to return the library books on time, things like that. His fits didn't happen often, 2 or 3 a year maybe, and they lasted just a few minutes, but he'd go completely crazy. I don't remember what set him off that night. Maybe I didn't know. Suddenly he was on his knees, screaming and blubbering. "God damn it, the hell, what have I done? I'm nothing, a worm, a loathsome worm. The vileness of the universe, scum, I'm pure scum," said Daddy. Then he keeled over on his stomach, splayed against the hardwood floor. "Oh, Lord, Lord Jesus Christ, sweet Jesus Christ, help me, Jesus." He went on and on, the most horrible blasphemies and pathetic pleadings you ever heard. I disappeared into my room and closed the door and sat on my bed, wondering if I'd ever have fits like my daddy's. The next morning, Amy, my secretary, waits until I settle behind my desk and start working. Then she bounces in all pert and breathless and says, "You hear the news?" "What news?" I lean back and try to look curious. "Bobby Joe Mills is back in town." "You're too young to remember him, Amy." As usual, Amy ignores me. "He's staying down to the Holiday Inn, but they say he's going to buy a house out and settle around here," she says. That's hard to believe, Amy. Gloria Pilcher told me she knows Bobby Joe's mama real good. Really well, Amy. Once in a while, I correct Amy's grammar. She doesn't mind, but she doesn't care either. Says he come back rich and he's going to buy a mansion in Southeast Charlotte or out to the lake and live. He has to live somewhere, Amy. Where's he been all these years? That's what I want to know. Gloria says even his mama don't know, and a mother ought to know. Yeah, she should. I bet he's been doing something illegal. I bet he's been running drugs. Bobby Joe wouldn't run drugs. He might take them, but he wouldn't run them. How do you know? Amy pulls up and smooths her hair. Everybody says he was no good. He and I went to school together for 12 years, Amy. Then you know he's no good. Her bony shoulders arch. He wouldn't run drugs. 30 years, a long time. He might have changed. He might be worse. I sell insurance, Amy. I know most people change once when they die. So what's he been doing? Any appointments this morning, Amy? Miss Smith called, wants to talk to you about her policy, says it's not worth the paper it's written on. Amy winks. What time? 10. Anything else? That's all, boss. When Amy says boss, I know she's in a particularly good mood. I'm going over to the anchor, Amy. If anyone comes in, tell them your boss had to go out and he'll be back at 10. So that's the opening of that story.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And what number story is that in the collection?
God, I don't know.
It's okay.
It's near the end.
Maybe I'm
It's near the end. It's one of the darkest stories in
the darkest, okay.
in the volume, though it's both. There's a lot of, I trust there's a lot of humor in it as well, but it's Bobby Joe is, I think, one of the most complicated characters I've created in the short stories. And of course, there's a party on the plank on the lake. So, you know about Lake Norman?
No.
Heard of it? No, of course not. Lake Norman is a huge lake in North Carolina that was created when they built a dam. And they had to buy out some of the nicest farm country in the state.
Oh, wow.
Or to fill the dam. And it was a big fight.
I believe it.
All the rich people built houses along the lake. It's a classic American story.
Reminds me of I'm forgetting the author's name, but there was the Monkey Wrench Gang. It was about the Lake Powell in Arizona is made from a dam, and then there's a group that goes.
Yeah, Lake Powell is, that's right. It's on the border, I think, between Arizona and Nevada, maybe.
I think so, yeah. I think you actually can, when you're on it, you can ride your boat from Nevada to Arizona or whatever. It's a huge, sprawling lake. But
right.
Some of the I've seen pictures. It looked really lovely, but some of the nicest canyons, in the world, and people liked for beauty. Some people said they rivaled the Grand Canyon and things, and they dammed it up. And
Edward Abbey wrote some great stuff about that river. And he was one of I taught a graduate seminar a number of times in environmental literature. And Edward Abbey was one of the hellions of environmental literature.
I think that's who wrote Monkey Wrench Gang. I think it was Ed Abbey that wrote Monkey Wrench Gang. But I have it. It was one of my dear old friend's favorite books, and he'd get it for me. I don't.
I read it many years ago. Yeah, it's
many
good.
Years ago. Huh?
Anyway,
good one. Awesome. Well, so I think that's a nice place for us to get to the last call here. You don't have to go home, but you'll have to restart the video for anyone watching. So the last question I like to ask everyone is just if they had one piece of advice you would impart upon our viewers, something small, whatever, that would make their life just a little bit better if they took it. What would you tell them?
Live every day with as much pleasure as you possibly can.
That's lovely. I think it's poignant too, in the sense that you can get bogged down by everything that happens in the world, right? You watch the news, especially, right? And you can forget to just try to live with some joy. And that's what I try to do. Like, it can be chaos around the house. That doesn't mean I don't need to live with some joy, right? It may be chaos in the world.
That's right.
Everything going on, but you still need to find that joy in your day. So that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, for coming on, spending some time with me and sharing your work and your life and, and reading from those short stories. It's been a real honor to have you and yeah, best of luck with everything.
It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate it.